Hello everybody, I'm Ajit K. Mishra, your course instructor for literature and coping skills. As I told you in my last lecture that I'll be back with yet another lecture on love, heartbreak and healing. This time I'm going to walk you through the other ideas, other significant ideas associated with heartbreak. If you remember, in my last lecture I talked about heartbreak and the various factors associated with it. And while talking about heartbreak, I also told you that it's very important for each one of us to know why is heartbreak such an unavoidable phenomenon, unavoidable experience. It's simply because of love or the love need. We all need love because we'd like to belong to some place or somebody, and that's one big reason why this particular love drive or love instinct finally results in heartbreak, because we develop a system of attachment for that person or that thing. So in this lecture I'm going to walk you through the other aspects of heartbreak. So let's start. As I told you, I'm going to focus on love, heartbreak and healing from a different perspective, especially from the perspective of neuroscience, to help you understand this phenomenon better so that we can be prepared, we can be ready for the onslaught of heartbreak, and we can develop better coping skills to take care of this particular problem or mental challenge. So heartbreak, as you know by now, causes dramatic emotional pain. We feel it viscerally in our chest, our throat, even in our gut. Our heart can literally feel as though it pains, and it does so, and that's the reason why it's not always metaphorical. And this is why we refer to the experience as having a broken heart, as if this heart has broken and it's now experiencing tremendous physiological pain. But while the visceral sensations of heartbreak lead us to focus on the physical neighborhood, so the organ we should be worried about is in fact the brain. And interestingly enough, most people tend to ignore this particular organ because it's more about how the brain responds to such experiences than just the heart. So when a heart gets broken, our brain responds dramatically, and it is these reactions that are responsible for all the terrible symptoms we associate with heartbreak. So understanding why we feel, think and behave as we do when we are heartbroken is vital if we hope to manage our responses and recover, and that through certain better coping skills and strategies. So it's very, very important that we all understand where these symptoms come from, what actually causes these symptoms, and how these symptoms lead to various associated problems. So let's take a look at these interesting things. So the brain and heartbreak are very, very closely associated ideas, and that's why it's very important for us to understand the neuroscience of heartbreak, the everyday neuroscience of heartbreak, so that we can understand the phenomenon better, and then we can adopt a better or an informed approach towards this mental problem. So a study that was conducted by psychologist Arthur Aaron, neurologist Lucy Brown, and biological anthropologist Helen Fisher shows that romantic love activates in the caudate nucleus of the brain via a flood of a pleasure hormone, that is dopamine. So, every time somebody is in romantic love, that particular experience activates the caudate region, nucleus of the brain via a flood of dopamine. That means dopamine will get secreted and that particular brain region gets activated, the caudate region or the caudate nucleus. Now, what exactly is the caudate nucleus and why does it get activated via a flood of dopamine? Because dopamine is secreted in such an amount that it in fact activates the caudate nucleus greatly. Dopamine, I must tell you all that, it's a pleasure hormone like oxytocin, which is the love hormone, and serotonin, a happiness hormone. So, dopamine plays a very, very important role in our motivation, in our pleasure seeking behavior, and a few other things as well. So, the caudate nucleus is associated with what we know as the motivational and goal-oriented behavior, or this is very popularly called the rewards system of the brain. That means the caudate nucleus is deeply associated with reward and all kinds of behavior associated with reward. So, any of our behaviors which results to or moves towards rewards is in fact located here, or the cause of that particular behavior can be located to this particular brain region, the caudate nucleus. So, romantic love is in fact the motivation to obtain and retain the object of your affection. So, that way we come to the gate of a controversy. It tells us that love is an emotion or love is a motivation. It's a goal-oriented or reward-oriented behavior. It's not an emotion, it's a reward-oriented behavior because it is directed towards a certain reward and it is motivated towards that particular reward, which is the object of your affection. It can be a person, can be a thing. So, romantic love is in fact that particular motivation. So, interestingly, nicotine and cocaine, two substances, they also follow the same pattern of releasing dopamine. So, when dopamine is released, that means somebody is highly motivated and somebody becomes goal oriented, somebody is in fact seeking some kind of pleasure, or some kind of pleasure is being derived from that particular behavior or action. So, nicotine and cocaine have been seen to produce the same kind of effect on the brain as well. They also lead to the release of dopamine. So, in love, you are not like an addict, you are an addict, because there is a huge similarity between the releasing of dopamine when somebody is in love and the same when somebody consumes nicotine or even cocaine. So, that means love also acts as an addiction. So, that's the reason why most people refer to the love experience as an experience of addiction. So, as if they are addicted to love. So, somebody is not like an addict, somebody is in fact an addict because of this particular pattern. But love is a natural positive addiction. The symptoms of heartbreak such as cravings, and emotional and physical dependence are similar to drug withdrawal. And that's very, very interesting, because love is of course a positive and natural addiction. Natural because it's a need, it's an urge, it's a desire which comes to us naturally because of that instinct, life instinct. And love, when it leads to heartbreak, when it's not requited, when it's not returned, when it's not preserved, can lead to heartbreak. And when it leads to heartbreak, or when heartbreak happens, people who experience a heartbreak also experience certain cravings, and they also experience certain emotional and physical dependence on somebody, as if that particular object of their love will continue to sustain them, and in the absence of that particular object of their affection and love, they will fall apart. So the dependence, the psychological and the physical dependence, touch cravings, or touch starvation, the skin hunger, which was otherwise met with when this person was in love with the partner. Now that the partner is gone and it has led to a heartbreak, the partner's disappearance or absence will in fact create a great amount of craving in this person who is experiencing heartbreak. So the emotional and physical dependence and the cravings all together will result in a certain type of behavior which is very, very similar to that to a person or of a person who is in fact withdrawing from drug use. So that's the reason why we are addicts when we are in love, especially romantic love. It's so similar to drug withdrawal. Therefore, it's not an easy process. It will cause a lot of problem to the sufferer, to the person who is experiencing the heartbreak. So, and there's something even more interesting, and that is the midbrain reward system, that is the caudate nucleus, is still in love. Poor thing, because it doesn't even realize that heartbreak has taken place and a separation has taken place, and there is no hope for any further reward. But this particular region doesn't even know that. It still is in love, and therefore even after the breakup, it continues to feel as if the reward will continue to come, and it waits for that reward. So the wait turns out to be a long and never-ending wait in the case of a heartbreak. So the neurons that expect reward, they do not generally shut down. They keep going and going, waiting and waiting for a fix. And what is that fix? It's the reward. And until and unless that reward comes, the neurons will be activated. They will remain activated, and that particular caudate nucleus will still be in love. So that's a very, very big concern. And we also know that there is a neural overlap between physical pain and social rejection. I talked about this overlap in my last lecture. And in such overlaps, there are certain brain regions like the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. They respond broadly to stimuli that elicit negative affect. For example, if a person touches something that is extremely hot, the person is bound to be burnt, and the person is bound to experience severe physical pain or physiological pain. and that experience of physical pain is in fact located in these brain regions. Similarly, when a person comes across the photograph of his or her love interest or lost love interest, the person begins to experience certain mental or negative feelings or emotions, certain mentally challenging, disturbing emotions. And while this person is experiencing these emotions, the experiences can again be located in the same brain regions like the dorsal, anterior cingulate cortex and anterior insular, the same brain regions. So that establishes the fact that physical pain and emotional pain are very, very alike in multiple ways. So that's a very interesting proposition in fact. So this emotional pain which feels like physical pain, showing withdrawal symptoms, intrusive thoughts, actually keeps us stuck and thereby causing a great amount of emotion dysregulation in us. So these are some of the things that happens to us when we experience emotional pain that feels like physical pain. Therefore, we call it heartbreak. So the first is withdrawal symptoms, because coming out of heartbreak is almost like coming out of drugs. So the sufferers behave in similar ways, and there will be intrusive thoughts, the thoughts of the lover, the love interest, either lost or gone forever, separation, trauma, pain, all these intrusive thoughts in the form of flashbacks, memories will continue to return and haunt the sufferer. And these experiences will in fact keep a person stuck, fixed at one point, and it will be very difficult for the person to move on in life. So movement will be severely restricted, and this will also result in severe emotional dysregulation, including paradoxical emotional behavior, now angry, now very sad, now low, now high. So people begin to show different kinds of emotions, and they do not know how to regulate those emotions, because those emotions will continue to challenge them so severely that they will experience emotional dysregulation. And all these in fact point towards something that we call the broken heart syndrome. This broken heart syndrome is also called stress cardiomyopathy. That's a medical name for the broken heart syndrome, stress cardiomyopathy or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. Stress cardiomyopathy is very, very easy to follow, understand, because it is induced by severe stress, this cardiomyopathy. And then the Takotsubo myopathy. Now, this Takotsubo cardiomyopathy derives its name, especially the first part of this phrase, Takotsubo, derives its name from the Japanese octopus trap. So the Japanese octopus trap has a certain shape in which the bottom of the trap is a little broad, and then the neck of the trap is very narrow. With the help of that octopus trap, the Japanese in fact trap octopuses. Now, why Takotsubo? Because when somebody is experiencing heartbreak and then stress and anxiety related to that heartbreak, the left ventricle of the heart acquires a shape which is very, very similar to that of the Takotsubo octopus trap. So it gives us a feeling as if that particular part of region of the heart has become, stressed. Therefore, it has derived that particular shape. So, due to the emotional stress caused by the traumatic breakup or the death of a loved one, if somebody experiences heartbreak, the heart, the stressed out heart, especially the left ventricle of the heart, acquires that particular shape. Therefore, it is called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. So, the broken heart syndrome is in fact very, very similar to any cardiovascular issues, but then it does not in fact cause a cardiovascular arrest just because of this heartbreak experience. So, there is a difference between, but there are instances where people have succumbed to the stress or the pressure that was a result of heartbreak. So, broken heart syndrome can lead to some deaths as well, but the rate is very, very low. So, heartbreak actually leads to a variety of aftershocks. So, it is very, very important that we know these aftershocks well, so that we begin to think about those things in an informed manner. So, the first can be complicated grief. The grief that results from heartbreak, if it is not resolved, it will promptly become unresolved grief or complicated grief. It will not remain as any normal everyday grief. It will become complicated if it is unresolved. And once it is complicated, it will lead to several other mental disorders. Then narcissistic wound, heartbreak. If you remember, I also talked about social rejection and social pain. So, social rejection causes a tremendous amount of social pain. That means when we fail in interpersonal relationships, including romantic ones, we are bound to experience social rejection and social pain. That can lead to narcissistic wounds. These narcissistic wounds mean that a person who has experienced some kind of humiliating rejection once will not be able to be comfortable in the company of people ever again, until and unless the same person receives a lot of appreciation from outside, externally. That will make this person comfortable, that will help this person overcome the narcissistic wound, and the person can return to normal life again. So, if the narcissistic wound persists, it can promptly result in depression and various depressive disorders, including MDD and then PTSD and a variety of other attachment disorders as well. And then we come to PTSD, as you all know. It can promptly lead to PTSD if it's not taken care of. Heartbreak. If the person, the sufferer, doesn't know how to take care of heartbreak, if people around the person or the sufferer do not know how to help the sufferer with certain things to enable the sufferer overcome the heartbreak, it will promptly lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. It can, or it does in fact, lead to substance use, misuse, and finally abuse. Because most people derive immediate relief from substance use. In heartbreak cases, it's the substance that gives instant and immediate relief to a person, because you're completely out of your senses, your brain will not respond in any manner to the experience of heartbreak. Therefore, you will not experience any pain at all if you allow yourself to be under the spell of substances. But that's not a permanent answer. That's not a permanent recovery option, because substances will keep you in an inebriated state, but they will not help you release yourself from the trap of the heartbreak or release your heart from this Takotsubo syndrome or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. So therefore, substance use is no answer to the aftershock of heartbreak. Moreover, all of the love-lorn report signs of lack of emotion control on a regular basis, since the initial breakup occurring regularly for weeks or months. That also includes inappropriate phoning or calling, writing emails, sending messages, pleading for reconciliation, sobbing for hours in loneliness, in privacy, and then drinking too much or making dramatic entrances and exits into the rejecter's home, place of work or social space to express anger, despair, and passionate love. So, if I can quote Lucy Brown, who suggests that novelty activates the dopamine system. And this dopamine system is extremely beneficial for energy and optimism because it creates a substitute reward. So therefore, we need to improve our coping skills or develop our coping skills through a set of strategies or mechanisms, and then we can overcome the onslaught, the pangs of heartbreak. So this is a major problem that is associated with heartbreak. Most people are not able to overcome, accept the heartbreak, the realities associated with heartbreak, and that's the reason why they engage in various emotional dysregulation activities like calling the rejecter, messaging, then dramatically entering into the rejecter's private space and doing a variety of things. So all these things. But these things are not going to help. They generally give these people temporary relief. So it's very important that we understand how coping skills in fact can help us overcome these problems. So let's take a look at these coping skills that can help us overcome the pangs of heartbreak. So the first of these coping skills, which many therapists advise, suggest, is called negative reappraisal. This is a coping skill that is directed towards obstructing intrusive thoughts in the form of flashbacks, negative memories, even nightmares, negative thoughts. So this particular approach can obstruct those feelings from coming to you, because every time these feelings come back to you, they will haunt you again, because you'll be promptly transported to that particular condition when the heartbreak actually happened, and you will get trapped in that condition again. So if you begin to recall the annoying qualities of the ex-partner, that will give you some kind of ratiocination to think that yes, the ex-partner was not a perfect one, therefore what if I have lost her or him? I can still get somebody who is far more perfect than my ex-partner or ex-lover. So such negative reappraisals can actually lead to positive results. That's exactly what most therapists suggest or propose. And then there is something called reframing, because the initial response has to be one of negative reappraisal, in which a person, in order to block intrusive thoughts from coming continuously, can engage in negative reappraisal. And in this stage, you prepare a list of the things that you do not find or do not like in your ex-partner. So instead of preparing or focusing on the things that you actually liked about your ex-partner, which will keep you trapped, you in fact prepare a list of the things that you did not like about your ex-partner. And that particular list will give you strength to think that you have not lost much. You still have a life that you can live. You still have possibilities of finding your true love and true partner. So once that happens, you can enter the next stage, that is a reframing stage, where you reframe, because that old frame is gone, it's lost, it's broken now. You need to reframe everything. And how do you do that? And this is exactly where you adopt a better approach towards your ex-partner. That means, okay, fine, the ex-partner was not a perfect one, but it was not a bad experience at all to love or to fall in love with my ex-partner. It was worth loving her or him. So this is exactly when you treat love feelings as less problematic. Because whenever heartbreak happens, most people begin to play the blame game. They blame their partners, ex-partners, they blame themselves. They finally blame the very idea of love. And that's exactly what happens to most sufferers of heartbreak. So they blame the very idea of love. Why is it here? What is it doing here? It's such an evil thing. Are some of these responses that we generally get from the sufferers of heartbreak when they begin to blame the idea of love itself. They say that I'm never ever going to fall in love again. I hate love, or I hate to be loved. So this blaming of love will in fact render you incapable of resuming your life or incapable of finding any love interest in your life. So that will gradually push you towards the darker realm. Therefore, reframing helps us create another frame for that particular thing. So what if one frame has broken? We can create another frame, a better one for that particular thing. So in this stage, we treat love feelings as less problematic. And then we finally come to the distraction stage, when we try to distract ourselves from the very thoughts of our ex-partner or our love experience, the past love experiences. So we begin to focus on things that take us away from the thought of love and the breakup. So that helps us. It can be anything. Somebody can focus on one's badminton skills, one's cricketing skills, one's music skills. So you are actually distracting. You can focus on your friends. Imagine, as long as you have been in love or you had been in love, you did not have enough time to go out with your friends, interact regularly with them. Now you can think of distracting your attention from one particular thing that is gone, lost, to the other things, other positive things in life. So that will help. Apart from these coping strategies, there are various other coping strategies. I'm reminded of a very famous set of coping strategies proposed by Guy Winch, psychologist. And if you can find some time for yourself, you can watch Guy Winch TEDed video, and then you can focus on the other types of coping strategies that Guy Winch is also talking about. So when I take you to the other segments of this module, I'll be focusing on some other coping strategies as well, which I will allocate in relation to the poetic compositions that I have selected for discussion. So that way we come to the end of this lecture. I hope it helps, because it's very, very important that we understand what heartbreak is all about, how it is caused, what are the consequences of heartbreak, what are the neurobiological aftermaths of heartbreak, and then finally how we can in fact cope with heartbreak, so that we learn that we can overcome heartbreak with a concerted approach. So with that, I end this lecture. Thank you very much for joining me.